Good evening, all. Welcome to another episode. That sounds like a really cheesy radio intro. So, those of you that are new to the concept surrounding this, and I don't think it's anything inventive, it's anything new, but I've called this man baggage, which is essentially just bringing men and the conversations around them, the struggles they're facing, to the forefront of the conversations and the narrative behind this whole strength in speaking thing. What does that mean? What does it look like? Do we have the communication skills for that? And so forth. I'm going to be joined by... Well, thanks to those tuning in. Please do just throw anything in terms of questions. I've got a couple of things I want to talk about as well. Are you there? He's there. How are you? You okay?
Hello, mate. Not seen you in ages.
I know. When was the last time? I can't even.
Expo.
That's March.
I know. And we were just doing jiu-jitsu on the concrete outside with Jordan Sayat, and then that was it. I never see you again.
I didn't enjoy doing any of that. I don't know what you and Jordan were getting up to, but that was nothing to do with me.
You're jumping over people and all that nonsense.
Oh yeah, I think I just reached the point of delusional at that point, just like in the world. I think Benny's going to hop in as well.
Nice.
Pop up in the chat. One of the concepts I wanted to talk about today is this whole lone wolf mentality, which I think thrives in fitness and very much. Where's Ben? Thrives in fitness, this lone wolf mentality, and kind of one of the things I noticed about the strength in speaking narrative is that culturally and societally, like nurture circles are something which I would class as more effeminate. Hopefully the narrative is shifted a little bit. But if you are of that kind of classic male archetype, mentally focused with those sorts of things, I think it can lend itself to actually being counter to what we're hopefully encouraging out of men.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know that the term lone wolf is oxymoronic, right? Because actually wolves are like the most pack animal that you can think of. Like they literally operate as a pack. That's literally what they're known for. So the idea of someone being a lone wolf seems like completely nonsensical, and that's just not like how they operate as a species. And so the idea that someone is a lone wolf, hello mate, to me just doesn't really butter any parsnips. And there's that ancient old saying whereby if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go with the village. So like we all need that support, and I'm massive on that. Like that's my biggest thing. It's the biggest thing I talk about when anyone talks about anything about success. I say that like I'm nothing without my friends who have supported and carried me and bullied me and pushed me, and like literally. I mean, I tell this story of, I'm sure you won't mind. Oh, he's in my book anyway, about how I was in a really bad place, and then this guy came in from who was like our regimental dad, and he turned up and he was like, "Cole, you do what he wants, or you do what he wants with a black eye. Either way, like you're doing what he wants to do." And he was like, "Jim, listen, Colchester Rugby Club are looking for a strength conditioning coach, and would you be interested?" And I kind of gave this narrative of like, I've got a lot on my plate, doing core and my mental health and stuff. And we had a brief moment, and he rearranged my attitude for me. And I realised that I did want to go and be a strength conditioning coach for him at Colchester Rugby Club. And like his bullying and dragging me there, and support and love and kindness he gave me, actually like really set me on this path of becoming a therapist. That was the original start point. So yeah,
and I gather like we are social creatures as well. We're built for connections. This idea that we can get by on our own sometimes isn't necessarily a helpful one, I don't think. Ben, how are you anyway, mate? Because I know you've jumped in.
I'm good. I didn't want to interrupt you.
No,
it was great what you were saying. No, I'm good. Thank you. How are you guys?
Yeah, because I know you wanted to cover a couple of things today as well, specifically, because we are talking about like health broadly, not just mental health today.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big component that I want to talk about today about mental health. Obviously, I've been talking about it quite a lot recently, especially recently with my medication, Kaftrio, and basically to kind of give people a kind of overview of what this is. I have cystic fibrosis. This medication came out. It's been in the pipeline for a long, long time. We got access to it on the NHS about 2 years ago, but I was actually given a chance to get on it about 6 months before I actually took it, because there was a lot of people saying they were taking it, and there was obviously some side effects, like any medication. There's side effects, but a big one of them was people's mental health being affected. Now, in my head, the way I rationalized things was, with my cystic fibrosis, I'm going to do whatever it takes to look after my health and make sure I'm in the best physical and mental place I could possibly be. I wasn't going to rely on some miracle drug coming along the pipeline and saving me as such. And hello, by the way. So yeah, that was a big concern of mine. So it actually took me a long time to actually take this medication. And I'll be honest, the psychological implications that it had on me were, I wasn't prepared for it at all. My entire life I was told, your life expectancy is this, it's 45. It was 20 when I was born. Then suddenly to kind of feel like every symptom that I had in terms of my cystic fibrosis was gone. And I spoke to a couple of people with cystic fibrosis in the same boat as me. It was weird. It was very, very hard to adapt to suddenly what you think was going to be the rest of your life, then suddenly just changing in literally the space of 5 hours. Like, that's how quickly this medication hit me. It was incredible. So I think, that was one of the main reasons why I didn't want to take this thing, because I had kind of built this mindset up for my entire life. And then suddenly for the rug to be kind of pulled in the best way possible, by the way, this is not me saying it's a bad thing, but I didn't know if I was ready for it.
That's good, mate. Can I ask you about that? So when you were born,
yes,
your life expectancy was 20, and then by the time you got to 25, it pushed to 45, and now this new medication has pushed it to
60s, 70s.
Nice, mate. That's how. So I'm pleased to I'm a ferret. So please say you're asking too many therapy questions, bro. So please, but what was that like growing up, thinking I've got 10 years left in the bag?
Honestly, I don't know any different.
Right.
That's the thing. It's a fantastic question, but I wish I could say, oh, it's this and this, but I didn't know any different. My whole mindset was, I'm going to put myself in the best position that when this medication eventually does come out, because I've been told about this medication for 15 years by my teams. They were like, there's this medication, it's going to be groundbreaking, we're making all this progress. And I was like, yeah, cool, but is it actually going to be as good as you say it is? And a big part of me never believed that. I didn't allow myself to believe that. Yeah. So it was, I would love to say it felt like this, but my entire mindset was, right, I'm going to put myself in the best place physically, mentally, to when this medication, if this medication does come, I'm going to be in the best position to take it. And yet, whenever it did come, I kind of hesitated a little bit. So yeah, it was strange. It was very, very strange. I mean, cystic fibrosis is a weird name.
I don't want to say the person's name in case I'm not right, but is there someone in the fitness industry who's quite well known, and she was a research scientist on that project, wasn't she? Do you know that?
I didn't know.
Yeah, that. No. She did an interview, and again, I don't want to get it wrong. I might be wrong. It might not have been cystic fibrosis, but I could swear that it was. She wound up doing an interview with someone. She's actually quite well known. She's a competitor, and she's actually a research psychopharmacologist, and
I would probably know of her. Yeah. I mean, there's not a huge amount of this in the world, so probably a good chance I know of her.
I'll message you offline, mate. But that's so interesting, mate. Thank you so much. That's wow. I couldn't quantify.
That's really interesting, because it's I think when we talk about mindset, and I certainly went through most of my adult life, not that I can possibly in any shape or form imagine what you've experienced, Ben, but we have these we treat parts of ourselves like we're defective, and we have these safety behaviours that come in from a point of self-preservation. So, you'd obviously told yourself a certain story because that is what you were led to believe, and you put this barrier up almost, again, in terms of developing your own resilience. How was it going, because I've heard you speak lots about it, but I think it'd be beneficial for other people to hear as well, is that when you're in the midst of that, and you can see the benefits of it in terms of providing hope to you and that barrier coming down. How did you navigate that?
As best as I could. I mean, there was, the English language sucks sometimes. I've said this so many times. It sucks for trying to express how I felt in those times. I I never truly believed that something this impactful would ever exist in my time. I really didn't. I hoped, like, trust me, I hoped, but I genuinely never thought, even whenever I went to speak to my doctors about this medication. So to kind of rewind a little bit,
Okay.
I went to do the trials for this medication maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, and I was turned down because they were like, look, you're too healthy for this medication. Again, it was the best reason to get turned away for a medical trial, but they were like, look, we need to see significant improvements for this to get funded.
Mm.
So they were like, look, thank you so much for coming in, but you don't, we need to see that big jump, and you probably won't see it with your lung functions being where you are, with your health markers being where they are. You probably won't see much of a difference on this medication. I was like, okay, cool. So that immediately tempered my expectations of what any medication was going to come out. There's people who have much lower lung functions than me, and I understood that could be the thing that keeps them having a normal-ish life. And in my team, and I completely tempered my expectations of what this was going to do. And I took it, and 5 hours later, I breathed in a way that I didn't realize that everyone else breathed the way I was breathing after that. I know it's hard to even put it into words, but I was standing by the sink. My wife was to my left, and I was like, I'm just going to take a breath. I'm going to try and take a deep breath, because usually when I took a deep breath, it would catch and I would cough every single time. And I took a deep breath, and I felt my lower lungs pop open, and I felt my lungs almost hit my rib cage, and I just burst into tears, because I had no idea that that's what breathing was like. For 31 years of my life, I thought, yeah, this is the way everyone else breathes. I'm not that different to all my friends. And then I could laugh again. I actually shouted at my neighbors. That's another ridiculous. So again, speaking for me was so much easier. My voice changed, even listening back to some of my old podcasts. My voice sounds so different. It was ridiculous.
That's wild.
It was honestly ridiculous. Yeah.
That's so wild, isn't it?
Yeah. It's incredible. I hope
And having
answered your question.
Yeah, no, they did. Thank you for sharing that. That's incredible, I think. And like you, by the sounds of it, you built this armor up over all these years, and then this groundbreaking new discovery. Like, did you find that? I asked you about navigating it, but lending yourself to that, was that difficult for you? Because obviously you prepared a certain mindset, which kept you strong. It was there for your safety.
Yeah.
A lot of people have commented about like the amazing resilience and mindset that you had around that. Like, how did that letting yourself go to it, like surrendering to actually, this is
there's two
helping
ways
me,
I
and can I
take this.
can I let my guard down with this?
Yeah, there's two ways I looked at it. I think I built my armor up. Let's use that analogy. I really like that. I built up my armor such to get me ready for life, for what happens if I do end up in hospital months upon months, and then I do pass away at 45 or 40 or even younger than that. But I think every piece of armor I put on myself almost prepared me for life anyway. Just a different path, maybe a shorter path and a more intense path, but it set me very nicely for life in general. So I didn't even need necessarily, like, the other way I was thinking about is like, I kind of put on this armor to then fight a battle that I didn't even need to fight. But like life's a battle anyway. Like, so I think whatever armor I crafted for myself in order to get me through life with cystic fibrosis, I still need it. It's just I've had to reshape it a little bit, but that's been fun. I know a lot of people who struggled, after they got this, and I had conversations with other people with cystic fibrosis about this, that they've kind of, you're getting ready for that fight, and then it never came, and you're like, wow. And a warrior, it's a warrior without a fight. It's not a good person to be around.
But as you said, like in terms of resilience, I think people can resonate with, unfortunately, the shit life throws at each one of us, the curveballs. We don't expect, perhaps not like to the same gravity that you've experienced, but I know you've certainly experienced some challenges as well, James. Like, I'm more than happy to talk about mine.
I was completely infatuated with that story, and I think that the kind of point you ended on there, like the crash that you had afterwards, like a warrior with no war to fight. I think that's so interesting, because certainly with a lot of clients, and myself included, like, we have to do a huge amount about identity. And so being a sufferer of cystic fibrosis, and I don't in any way want you to think that I think that you were a victim, because I know that it's not how anybody likes to be perceived, really. But you had this huge thing, right? You had this, and it was absorbing everything, right? It just had to. In the same way that like, Afghanistan absorbed everything for us, and military service absorbed everything for us, and being and that identity that came with it, being airborne, and all those military behaviours, they absorbed everything. And then one day it just comes to an end. Like, you know, I sign off and I go, I've had enough, and I stepped out and become resilient, and then went into psychotherapy, and now I'm head of psychotherapy of a clinic on Harley Street. But you step out and there's that. Well, then who am I? Who am I without this thing? There's a great quote, and the name of the person, I'm sure someone will jump up with it. But before you cure a man, be sure he's willing to be rid of the thing that makes him ill. And it's almost that thing where once you've kind of taken that uniform off, or in your case, taking the medication that has greatly extended your life expectancy, well, what happens now? Like, who am I now?
Yeah, it's the thing. I didn't put myself in the position I'm in to try and be a role model or a spokesman for cystic fibrosis at all. I just wanted to be Ben. Like, that's the kind of position I always wanted to put myself in. I didn't want to be known, oh, that's Ben, he has cystic fibrosis. I want people to be like, oh, yeah, he also has cystic fibrosis. I never wanted to be my main thing, and it's something that because I'm not a spokesman for it. Like, there's no one telling me you need to say this, you need to say this. I'm just sharing my experiences with it. And I found that when I did do that, it was helping people in ways that I never could have possibly fathomed. I literally just got a message from a guy saying how much he appreciates my content because he's just had a child with cystic fibrosis, and it gives him hope that his child will have a normal life. So I was like, well, look, I'm not going to make this my entire thing. So I never put all my stock into I am someone who has cystic fibrosis. I just happen to have cystic fibrosis. I also have a beard. I don't make my beard my entire personality. Unlike some people do. That's cool, but
I think that concept of identity is a really fascinating one, because, sorry to interrupt you, James, I think there's almost like an air of caution we all need when we solely tie our identity to one thing.
100%.
So, I think of that in every shape or form. Like, we see people like with a certain job title, or I'm a dad, or I'm a parent, or I'm like a CrossFitter, or I'm a bodybuilder. If your sole identity is based on one thing, then once that's removed from you, if you base your worth and value in that, but I think so many people end up lost as a result of that.
So I think that's a really great point, mate.
Facets, right? They're not just something we're solely tied to.
Mate, that's such a fun. I think that is such a fantastic point. I really do, mate, because I often say to clients, if I took away bodybuilding, who are you? Like, if I said if you couldn't pick up a dumbbell tomorrow, who are you? And there's that. Well, I couldn't tell you who I am without bodybuilding. That's a problem, because you're far more than a sport. And when I deal with the veterans who are on their way out of the military, now this is a huge discussion and that, but like low socioeconomic demographic, very vulnerable when they're recruited, therefore easier to radicalize, so therefore they're far more likely to be effective combat soldiers, right? So you get those effective combat soldiers, and then I say to them, the best thing that you can do when you think about leaving the military is discover a sense of identity outside of the uniform whilst you're still in the uniform. So you've still got the safety net, you're still getting paid, you still get the uniform, but you know that you're a great coach, and you're a family man, and you're a great dad, and you're all this multifaceted thing. You're not this person that's just, and I'm not belittling the uniform, but you're just in the uniform. So that constant evolution of your identity and your character is something that must go on. So it's like such an interesting discussion, because you develop this sense of identity, like, I've got this thing and it sucks. And if my life gets extended, then amazing. If it doesn't, I know who I am and what I'm about. And that's just so interesting. Like, psychologically, it's so interesting.
Yeah, identity is one I think is an interesting concept. And as you know, we are on the theme of men and their baggage, like masculinity as an identity, what it means to be a man.
Right, yeah.
In terms of both of you, and I guess like it might be the more archetypal views, or at least I think I speak for all of us. We're all in our 30s. We grew up in the 90s. We grew up with Sly Stallone, Arnie, the first real generation, I guess, of jacked action heroes, Marvel characters, comic books, etc. What did that look like and feel like? to the both of you growing up?
I think that there's it's such an interesting point, because I think first and foremost we've conditioned children from a young age to associate hypermuscularity with hypermasculinity.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. Just because someone sticks a needle in their arm and does loads of press-ups does not make them a man. Like if you're gonna judge the value of a man, you judge him by.
Interrupt you, James. I know you say that flippantly, but I do think that's a really important point to stress.
100%. No, it is. Oh yeah, no.
Muscularity is not masculinity, because a lot of young boys that want to look a certain way, is they feel like they have to physically embody what a man looks like, when actually, you know, a man isn't a shape or a shell. A man is so many things. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's reflected in how you treat those people around you, right? In your behaviours, in your kindness, and your compassion, and how protective and loving and supportive you are. That's your reflection of your masculinity. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And that childhood conditioning we see from like a really young age. And you know, many exercises that I've done with both groups and individuals is give me the top 5 traits that you would consider to be masculine, and the amount of guys who will say big arms. But like everyone like goes like what? But like that's like answers like that are really common. Yeah. Like muscle, size, physically impressive, like all of those, that type of like language is something that people use to describe masculinity, and things like compassion and kindness and protectiveness and loving don't make that. They talk about stoicism and muscularity, and you're like, what is going on here? Like the ability to do violence. Yeah. What? Well, I mean, I think that's quite an unhelpful narrative, and that comes up quite often in these discussions. I think when we talk about being aggressive or even being angry, people associate that with violence, when actually they can operate separately. Like you can be an aggressive when necessary, but compassionate, kind man. You can be angry, the same as anyone can be angry. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be violent. No one's condoning violence here, but because you're an angry person doesn't mean you're a violent person, you know? Yeah, no, yeah, exactly that, mate. There's far better ways of expressing anger than wantless and mindless destruction and damage to other people. Yeah, 100%. Don't get me wrong, every single human being has a right to defend themselves. They absolutely do. But like if you're projecting that, that's a problem. That's not masculine. And I wondered, like something I think about quite often is like there's quite a societal demand, I guess, like I think very necessarily, that men speak up and like are more advocates for what they can do for women, and talking out against bants, like misogynistic behaviour and stuff like that. But an interesting element of that conversation I find is like this male power dynamic that's at play. So, you know, I think when we talk about these things is when we make certain demands of men, especially if they're not well equipped to be in that situation, they're effectively putting themselves in harm's way sometimes. So when I talk about the male power dynamic, I mean, like, so let's give an extreme example here is, you know, you're out on the tube, there's a gent with his other half, he's being quite aggressive in how he's talking to her, quite in her face, etc. And then you challenge that man. The likelihood of that escalating is quite high. So it's looking at other means, because I think when the people that make those demands that men should step in don't necessarily think about the repercussions. Yeah. It's the 90-something% of men are victims of violent crime, right? Where men fighting men and men getting hurt by other men in those situations is the most common form of violence that there is. So what do you do? You know, if you see something like that and you want to ask in a way that isn't going to escalate the situation, how can you protect somebody who's vulnerable when you don't feel necessarily the physical capacity to do that? You know, it's difficult. You know, there's from calling the police to asking her directly if she's okay, and how can you help without wanting to get into a physical confrontation with a man, because there's a risk to your own health. Yeah, I mean, it isn't. And again, you know, it's that association with masculinity with violence that isn't just completely inaccurate. If a man who is a frail old man, but he's caring and he's loving and he's supportive and he's trying to help people as best as he can, you say he's not a man because he can't physically fight? Do you think like physical presence that does come into that? So when we talk about how masculinity is often embodied in it being like jacked, tall, you know, aggressive person, that how that would it be interpreted from someone like that to someone more slight in terms of that male power dynamic?
For me, that'd be like a really emotionally immature way of looking at that. Well, I'm big enough. Quite famously, Plato, when someone used to disagree with him, he would just take his shirt off and stand there and say, "Well, then fight me."
Oh, really?
And he's like, yeah, yeah. His name wasn't actually Plato. That was his nickname because he was as big and as broad as a plate. So he's like Plato, like it was like, so he was just so big. He was like a champion wrestler, and he would just offer to fight people if they disagreed with him. So I think that's probably the origin of that. Like the ultimate protest by one of the world's most intelligent men. Like
detracting from that slightly, I think there was I saw an analogy passed. I was watching something, and this guy had given this whole intellectual spiel about Plato, which was historically, at least as was reported, correct. They'd been calling him Pluto the whole time. So when you're trying to take someone dead serious, and then they get to the end of it, like, by the way, like one crucial detail is slightly off.
Yeah. Yeah. Poor guy, like, imagine that. That's so bad, isn't it? And no one like stopped him either. So it meant he never had actually read that. He never had practiced that. He just went with it.
Yeah.
Just called him Pluto the whole time. Oh man. But yeah, no, I don't associate masculinity with the way that a person is built. I think that's like a very naive like approach to it.
Do you think, honestly, do you think that influenced both of you? I mean, growing up in the 90s,
it did.
I didn't have a positive male role model in my life, but I did look to, I guess, like superheroes almost to pull apart with a male identity of sorts.
I can definitely relate to that. It definitely had an impact on me. I mean, I grew up thinking that I was different than everyone else, that I was weaker than everyone else. I had to take medication. I had to take, I had to do physio. There's always these kind of caveats around me and who I was. And I think people confuse like strong with strength, like being strong and having strength. Strength has, you can apply strength to so many situations that have nothing to do with your physical strength. But that's, it takes strength to, get up and, it takes strength to not take action sometimes. It takes strength to take medication that I didn't want to take. It takes strength to, it doesn't, I think there is, because they are obviously the same thing. So it's like simple and easy. People mistake the same thing for being the same, having the same meaning. They're not the same thing. Simple and easy, they sound the same, but they're not. Strength and being strong, not the same thing to me at all. Yeah, there you go. Someone said it takes, like, walking away takes strength. Like, I assumed growing up that in order for me to not look weak and not feel weak in myself, I need to be physically strong. And then as I get stronger, I was like, well, this means actually nothing. The strength is in the discipline of doing this action over and over and over again. To me, I would rather use my words than use my fists every single time, because I have no interest in fighting people. Does that make me less of a man? If it does, whoever says that it does, I don't value their opinion anyway. So,
well, who defines what masculinity is?
Exactly. There's no council of men that I'm aware of that all wear hoods and be like, right, these are the staples of what it is to be a man. There probably is, yeah. There probably is
somewhere.
I think what to jump onto that, just to like highlight that, there was a picture of Daniel Craig, and he was carrying his newborn son in one of those like harness things that sits on. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And who like laid into him like, oh no, how ridiculous. And it was Piers Morgan, and then it was Chris Evans, who obviously played Captain America. Like, only a man so insecure in his masculinity would try and quantify masculinity by belittling a man carrying his child. And I was like, there you go. Like that's the one. Like, man's just carrying his son. Leave him alone.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of the narrative, though, isn't it? Because I think, like, when we do think provider, like, people think about that in terms of just like a financial sense, but we don't think about, or at least we don't speak about as openly, men as care providers. I consider myself a very hands-on dad. I want to be a hands-on dad. I make time to do the things with my kids. I don't want to be one of these people that on their deathbed reflects back and thinks, I wish I spent more time with my kids. I want to make time for that now, especially when they're young.
Yeah.
But I think, like, generations gone by, it was like hands-off dads. They went away, money.
Yeah,
But that was the expectation. And I think like with societal shifts, there's been lots of progress for women. And this isn't a whataboutism. I think to support how women want to go, especially when it comes to choice and what they want to do with their occupation, is that needs to be met with equal measure with men. You know, if we're talking about parental leave and leave in general when children are sick, and you know, there's certain statistics that revolve around doctor's appointments and taking sick leave when kids are sick as well, is men need the same allowances there. And so the expectation isn't always on women, but also those men that want to participate and facilitate relationship with their kids can be more active.
I'm going on a podcast next year with this really brilliant woman, Linda, and Lisa, sorry, and I'm talking about this, because when I first had Georgina, not every public toilet for men had the baby changing tables in it. Because I had one when I was really young. So yeah, and like it was considered like really, still considered quite bizarre that like a dad would be like out with his daughter and like change the nappy and stuff. And I know that like times have changed quite dramatically in a short period of time, but yeah, I remember queuing up and asking the women if I could pop into the women's toilet and change my daughter, because the other option was to like change her on the pavement. And I know that everyone here has changed a mucky nappy, so I don't know if anyone here has ever managed a one-handed nappy change, but like impossible, I can't do it. So like I need the thing. So yeah, like I remember having Georgie really young, and it just be like people are like, oh, it's so good how hands-on you are with your daughter, and it's like, of course I am. Like,
it's like it's daddy daycare. You're like, no, this is like
yeah, when people say they have to babysit, I'm babysitting tonight. Or are you parenting? There's a difference in that language.
I feel like sometimes I get unfair praise. You know, I was in the supermarket with my youngest last week, and the woman said like how refreshing it was to see a man do the food shop. And I was, she was, bless her, she was a little bit more mature than me. But I thought, Jesus, what do men not do for food shop with their kids? Like, I don't think I deserve special praise for that. I think that's just like a normal run of the day thing. But it's interesting that like these societal views of men are not just from men; they are reinforced by women as well a lot of the time. So I don't want to get the world's smallest violin out, but I do feel like it's a tricky time for men to navigate this stuff in terms of knowing what to do. And you look at male role models and why certain demographics look to certain figureheads to have that are, you know, arguably speaking up for them. Because they are the only individuals having their voices heard. Yeah,
it's a really good point. There's a couple of guys who I serve with who have slightly older kids, so I quite often turn to them because there's no real like male role models. Like I don't really know how to raise a teenager. Like, you know, it's really hard. Like and the modern world is so confusing, and like we're going through this whole like WhatsApp stuff where like when you know, like when you did something stupid at school, you know, like how you went in the next day and it was forgotten about because something else had happened. Like kids don't have that anymore. Like because of WhatsApp and social media, like something happens at school and they all lay into each other on like WhatsApp groups and whatever. And
thank God there wasn't smartphones when we were growing up.
Yeah, right.
So glad.
I know. So glad. And yeah, or like, imagine like all of the stupid stuff you ever did, like being filmed and photographed and recorded and
still held against you now.
Yeah. So we're going through this phase, and like I don't really have any role models. I don't really like know what to do. Like just kind of like all parents say they're winging it, but I don't really have anyone that or anywhere I can go to where I can be like, how do I raise a teenage girl in the modern age with all this WhatsApp stuff, with all of this stuff on social media, access to things that like we didn't have access to. You know, like if you wanted to see anything adult, someone had thrown that magazine in a bush near the park and you had to go find it. Like, why was that a thing in every town? Who was going around doing that? People were going around
the magazines.
Yeah, right. Who was throwing Reader's Wives magazines? Just driving around the country throwing Reader's Wives magazines in bushes for like teenage boys to find. But now I've like a teenage daughter, and like I don't know what I'm doing, and like there's no like where do you go?
Yeah, I think there's unfortunately something I've kind of surrendered to is that we're likely to have a massive impact and not always positive in their lives, but if they can come out unscathed as possible, we've done an all right job.
Yeah. You know, just enough trauma to be funny.
Yeah, we are all just like winging it ever so slightly. What do you both think of this? I feel like there's a lot of awareness about stuff. There's a lot of awareness about men's mental health. And perhaps we can get onto the topic of why men, for whatever want the phrase of the word is, are more successful. Even though women attempt to die by suicide more frequently, men tend to be more successful. So we've got this narrative that revolves around strength in speaking, but I think a deeper issue is, well, there's many issues around this, is that we haven't got the communication skills necessarily to clearly articulate and verbalise what we're experiencing, let alone whether it's so societally embraced or anything like that. But who do we speak to? Like, where are the ears? Like, who is equipped with the skills for this? Because I know, like, I don't know whether they're watching, possibly, but some of my oldest friends, like, they're wonderful friends and I can rely on them for anything, but they might be not the friends that I go to when I'm at my most vulnerable, because I'm likely to be disappointed with their response. But then that's not a slight on them, that's just me understanding communication on their terms. Whereas I think it's having different relationships that serve different purposes. And that's kind of what I wanted this to be, a bit more of a platform for just space, just to talk about this stuff, converse about it, not necessarily for answers, but just, for other guys out there scratching their head. Is I kind of got a lot on my plate at the moment. I don't really know where to start talking about this. Like, what brought you both some courage? I'm going to use the word courage because I do think it's courageous to step forward and wear your heart on your sleeve with someone that perhaps you never have been before.
I think that the most important thing is when someone, first of all, to be able to actually have a conversation with someone, if you are feeling vulnerable, you're feeling, pain or anything like that as a man, I think just open up the conversation in any way you possibly can and expect that the person is not going to solve the issues, but the amount of issues that even just by getting them out of the washing machine is your head. That's the way I've always described it. Your brain, it's just a washing machine. You need to unload it sometimes. You're not going to maybe get answers, but just getting it off your chest, you can then start to kind of formulate a plan that you might be able to then help yourself. Like the friend, as you said, may not have the conversational skills to be able to actually help you, but you just speaking to them, being like, look, this is the issue I'm having, and then just going, yeah, okay, they may not be able to actually help you at all, but you then being able to verbalize that, you may actually come to some solutions yourself. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off the person. If someone comes to me to ask me about about their issues, I'm not going into it going, right, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to be the one that resolves this, because sometimes, most of the time, people will be able to resolve it themselves. But just having that conversation is the hardest thing. So if you're going into a conversation and you've got an issue, don't expect that person to fix it, but also be open to the fact that, just by you saying it all, you're getting it off your chest and getting it out into the kind of tangible world as such, you may actually then start seeing it from a different perspective. And I've always said that no matter who you speak to, someone's got a different perspective to you. They're outside of it. It's like being zoomed in, or having like a first person perspective of things. Sometimes having that third person perspective of someone outside of it, that might help you then go, okay, I'm thinking about this in a different, in a complete different way. It kind of can help them in that way. But I think like the problem with a lot of guys is that they're worried that they're going to say what they need to say, and people might judge them. Again, you need to pick the people you're speaking to. As you said, there's certain people fill certain roles in your life. I have a small group of friends that I can speak to about certain topics, and there's some topics I wouldn't talk to them about. But again, you can't have that unless you're out there making friends, and that's a hard thing to do as a guy.
I think
making friends
as you get older, making friends as you get older is hard. Like, for all of the faults we can highlight around social media, that is one of the wonderful things about it. It's been wonderful in terms of connecting people, finding like-minded people. All of the potential harm I think it can do is, in terms of new relationships, new friendships. Because I think if it's not too taboo to say, like, men need intimacy as well, and I don't mean that like from a physical sense. I mean that from just an emotional sense, as in someone to share memes with, someone to have a Nando's with, like someone to go training with. Like, intimacy comes in different shapes and forms. It doesn't necessarily need to be what we typically associate it with.
Yeah, I was actually, we're out in Spain at the moment, and my wife and I were sitting down, and we've been out for a walk, and there was these two English guys, and now English accents, they all kind of blur into one for me a little bit. I know that's me saying that with my strong accent, but I could tell there's a difference. I know. My dad's English, so I can say it's fine. And they were both talking about their equal dislike of some other place in England, and it was just amazing listening to these two guys. And I was just staring straight forward. I didn't want to be just like locking eyes and making them feel awkward, but it was actually so nice just to hear these two old guys just chatting. And then they both got up. One of them was actually a blind man. He had his stick and everything. And he went, "Do you want to go for a beer after this?" And they were like, "Yeah, let's go for a beer." And I don't know what it was, but it just made me so happy. Just hearing these two guys just chatting about random stuff. I think they were talking about what accents they liked on women and like what football teams they hated and how arrogant this team is and what sponsors they had. And I was like, that's so nice to see these two old guys just chatting away and then being like, let's go get a beer. Yeah. I don't know what it was. I just absolutely loved it. I even said to my wife, I was like, that conversation it just made me so happy to see that. I guess especially guys of that generation, because again, every generation is just dealing with the generation that preceded them. They're having to deal with all their trauma and their issues. Yeah. We're dealing with all the traumas that our parents had to go through. They're dealing with the trauma their parents had, and it's just this cascading effect. So it's so nice to see someone of that generation that we would look at and go, they're backwards in the way they think. It was so nice to see that just moment of just two guys just chatting, jumping up and being like, right, let's go for a beer. I just loved it. I just had to say that. But
what was the place that they hated? I bet it was Birmingham. It was Birmingham.
Actually, no, they said they really liked the Brummie accent.
No.
I was like,
no.
I was like, well, you're wrong. But
no. It was. You said they were old. They'd gone, mate. They'd lost it.
I think
they said horrible.
I think they said something. They were talking about Leeds. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone's from Leeds here. So
I don't think there's any way of winning. You're bound to say somewhere, a place where someone is from.
Look, it's the internet. I'm going to offend
well, you have, and we're going to be having a little DM after this.
Yeah. Mate, I'm from Belfast. We don't need to speak correctly. It's fine.
I think part of this as well is, again, like the good thing is there is a shift in generations, because when we talk about things that are on our mind is, if I can give an example, is as a hyper conscious of my body teenager in a much larger body, is for me to go to one of my PE teachers or like a friend, like I'm a bit insecure about my body, like although I like rugby and football, I don't want to do skins, because those are the days, skins versus shirts and like mixed swimming classes, when you are hyper aware of your body shape in comparison to other people and whatever your sexual interest may be, is I think under the guise of bants, that would have been something that I got ridiculed with. And I think when you do put yourself in the firing line for that harsh experience doesn't lend itself to then going on and being super open and transparent with people. If anything, it makes you withdraw.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. So, like, without getting all super boringly technical about it, like how the brain works when we communicate effectively is it allows us to effectively make sense and process emotions. We draw from our hippocampus, our emotional memory bank, and it goes to various departments, including then the prefrontal cortex, which is conscious reasoning. So when we can understand why something has happened and why something is happening, it means that our brain can formulate a plan on how to manage it and prevent it from therefore happening again. So therefore our risk of danger to our survival structure has been reduced, and that's why it's so important. But it is about creating that space, and it's why we've seen the explosion of male support groups, such as like Andy's Man Club. That's quite a prominent one that's become like really, really popular. These groups specifically for men. It's really interesting. So there's a report, and I believe the link for it is actually still in my link tree, which is for the APPG. So the APPG is the All Parties Parliamentary Group. So it's a non-politically biased group that basically just reports into various different things that are relevant to the government and the civil service at the time. And so they did about male suicidality, and it was really interesting. They talked about the fact that something like 79% of people men who had taken their own life had actually spoken to someone who worked in mental health therapy. And as a therapist myself, I can attest to the fact that gender differences in psychotherapy and its application is not really a topic that's discussed that much about at all. There's certainly not a module on it, and yet there are gender differences and gender biases when it comes to psychotherapy that are like really interesting things like the difference in genders between emotional validation and purpose and identity, like generally speaking, men crave that purpose and identity. I do a lot of Viktor Frankl logotherapy, man's search for meaning with men. Not saying that women don't at all, because that's incredibly naive, and I'm not like saying that at all. But the vast majority, if we were to categorize it, the vast majority of men take far more to logotherapy, whilst with generally speaking, but not true in all cases, as Carl Jung says, that every individual you meet is the exception to the rule. But the vast majority of female are far more craving of that emotional validation. So we don't do really enough, I don't think, in the gender divide in psychotherapeutic practice, because men crave different things, generally speaking, when it comes to their psychotherapeutic treatments. So I think first and foremostly that, and the All Parties Parliamentary Group did come to a really interesting conclusion, which is they started referring to male suicidality as, instead of calling it like a mental health issue, they started calling it rational suicide, because there was homelessness, there was infrastructure issues. So things like 96% or whatever it is of homelessness is men. And I understand there's lots of patriarchal issues and that have created that. I do understand that, but the vast majority, like 90% of homelessness is men, and 80-something% of bankruptcy is men, and only 14% of men get the custody of their children they ask for on a court of law. And again, that's really easy to look at those statistics, but they're very multifaceted, and there's a lot behind that. But however, the vast majority of these suicides are men who have become bankrupt, have lost their job, have lost their money, have no financial stability, have lost their homes, and have lost access to their children. So the vast majority of those suicides were then saying, well, is that then a mental health issue? Or is that actually quite a rational decision? Because if they don't have that support, if you are facing homelessness, that social isolation, that shame, is it then a mental health issue, or is that an infrastructure issue?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of stigma around that. As you know, we spoke a little bit about financial implications, especially economically, and how the world is now, because we like kind of the happy, clappy mental health talk, but we don't talk really about the quality of life and the other implications that feed into that. You know, as you say, like if you are really financially constrained, and you know, putting a roof over your kids' house, like feeding your kids' heads and feeding your family is something to consider as well. That's going to have implications on how you feel as a person and how that fits into your identity, your sense of self, and everything else. Not just the actual physical, I cannot afford this as well. But you said a word in the description there, James, that really jumped out to me. And I think if we're distinguishing differences, survival especially is like a really maladaptive thing. I think a lot of boys into men go through, because they are more at risk, I guess, of being ostracized, cast out, ridiculed, taken the piss out of, bants, etc. Whereas, like, I guess women's circles are more, they are like nurture circles. And there isn't a place in a certain group, there's another group to go to. Whereas, you know, I had to be a bit of a chameleon. And when I do think about that like survival at the time, because you want to make your way through the days and through your years into young adulthood without, you know, physical harm or emotional harm, these other things. I think survival is a really crucial word there.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a very multifaceted answer. There's a really wonderful saying that we've got, which is that nothing about human brain or behavior makes sense until you view it through the lens of evolutionary biology. So, like, this whole thing around survival and this desire to stay, have a position on a social hierarchy and maintain that position at all costs, or potentially further it, basically has created this desire for people to find any way that they can to get that bit ahead of someone else on a social hierarchy. And we often then see that projected through their behaviors, whether it be like ridiculing someone because they're slightly different, and what is slightly different threatens the status quo of the tribe. And this is all like very subconscious, but threatens the status quo of the tribe. So we attack what we consider different, thus creating young men to be chameleons, and thus teaching them to kind of repress their emotional needs, because they don't want to stand out, because then they're just going to get attacked and savaged by the group. So that emotional repression, because they need to maintain a position on a social hierarchy. And we can see that social hierarchy in many different forms, in many different contexts and environments, and different people. And it is really fascinating, and sometimes it serves a really fantastic purpose. But in the you know, in other ways, whereby, particularly if we're looking at it from the perspective of ostracizing, demonizing, bullying people because they're a bit different, like, that's ridiculous. You know, the best environments are the one where everyone is welcome, and it's a safe environment is created for that, for those people to be in there. I mean, I know, Dan, that you're a massive fan of it as a sport, as am I, but that's one of the key foundations of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's for everybody, like, come and join in and come and do it, and like, all, you know, gender, size, body shapes, whatever it might be, becomes irrelevant, like, come and roll. But however, so yeah, we see that, and so we definitely see that with little boys, and then that then projects into their adult lives, whereby then they're ridiculing, terrorizing, teasing boys and other men because they're slightly different, and then that slight difference, then those people then learning to then suppress that and then project it onto other people, and so thus that cycle continues. So yeah, it's fascinating, but it's because it's survival, and that's what we need to do as cavemen, of course.
But it's the interesting thing, like, with this awareness around it, is I find myself almost contradicting myself sometimes, because, like, just using my kids as an example, is as a child, you want nothing more than your child and them to be accepted, you know, accepted within the tribe, and, you know, part of that, not ostracised, not left out of things, not even bullying, but just not left out. They're not the kid on their own, colouring in silence, etc. So you want them to be accepted, but the older they get, is you also want them to
be unique,
accept their qualities and their quirks, and, you know, as I talk about myself, is like, be comfortably weird in their own skin. So it is a contradiction, because you want them to fit in, but actually you also want them to stand out, because that lends itself to being an authentic adult. And when you are going through this survival period growing up, it kind of makes sense why I think a lot of men especially struggle with a sense of identity growing up, because you're trying to fit in, even though you know some of those things that you're doing or the groups that you're in don't necessarily align with how you feel about yourself. Like, I've always associated myself with quite a sensitive bloke, so I can be that person. I can be like the stoic, silent type. I can be hyper aggressive when I need to be. But, you know, something I've always struggled with BJJ and competition is that I'm always of the mind is I don't want to hurt my partners when I'm at training, but on competition days I find it quite difficult to flip that switch, because actually someone is trying to harm you. But my disposition is to not harm someone, you know.
Yeah.
And I think when you're fighting that, and that's in many shapes and forms, and that may be like how certain groups of men are wolf whistling at women, or how they're speaking to each other and how they're taking the piss out of each other, is you end up sitting with that and feeling like you're abandoning part of yourself. I found, especially in my younger years, now I would comfortably say I don't agree with that. Like, I'm more than happy to disagree with people now. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to end in an altercation of sorts. But I think you put yourself in environments where you just take that stuff on the chin, because it's much easier just to, as part of that survival, just to accept that that's how people are. Ego is mentioned there. Yeah, your ego and actually being accepted in the group is a huge part of that as well. Sorry, lots of words came to the forefront of my mind now. I'm hugely aware of the time people are giving up. So if anyone watching, if you have any questions, we've got like another 6 minutes. I'm going to hold these guys for captive. If you do have any questions, put them in the box. I'm not really. I've got one question that's sitting there now that I popped up on the screen. I don't know whether this does fit in with the theme of today, but I'm going to ask anyway. How come fitness gym influencers don't talk about body measurements anymore? Loads of pics and weight and height stats, but no measurements.
It's all irrelevant, pretty much. Like, that's what we've gotten to that point where, like, we've been in the industry. Dan, I know you've been in the industry for a long time. It's the first time I've met yourself, but we have been through that evolution of the fitness industry, like, where everything was about bodybuilding. It was how big you are, what weight you were, you know, what measurements you were. And I think we've just evolved past the point, and we've realized that that's not doing anything other than just massaging our egos. And then you mentally mature and go, you know what? It doesn't matter what my bicep measurements are, what my waist is, it doesn't matter at all. My waist measurement does no.
You're speaking to the crowd, your echo chamber here, because I think there's still a large proportion to flex with that stuff all the time. But yeah, it's interesting.
Like, I think, and I think again, it depends on on the social circles you're in. Some people, that's all they care about, and cool, they have their little tribes that they can have that. But I think once you get to a certain point, you're like this is not doing anything other than massaging my ego, and also then breeding comparison. My chest measurement has no value to either of you guys. It's not going to affect your day in any way, shape, or form. So I think we've just moved past that point where it's like, look, you do you. You've got the amount of time that you've got in a day to be able to do what you do. This whole 24 hours in a day. Yes, everyone technically has 24 hours in a day. Is it the same?
How much?
Not a chance.
I hate that so much.
I hate it so much.
9 o'clock at night.
Like you just have to accept the fact that everyone has priorities. If you can push fitness up there and your own mental health and physical health, you can push that up to the top of the, you know, as high as you can on that priority list. That's your job. But I think we've just moved past that. I think it's it doesn't benefit anyone really.
Got a question here. What got you guys into doing this? And the follow-up to that part of the same person's question is, was it just a passion or personal experiences?
Into what? Into
I guess to having this conversation.
I think it's important. It's really important. We talked about all the struggles we have and all the conflicting information of what it is to be a man and mental health and all that stuff. And I think what we are doing, our generation specifically, is going to have that trickle-down effect. As I said earlier, you know, we're dealing with the ramifications of our grandfather's issues. We're still dealing with all that. But us just having this conversation could potentially change, you know, it may take a long time, but we're starting to move in the right direction. We may be the very, very first step in that, but I think it's super important to have these conversations because that's what's going to be what changes. And if we remain silent, nothing changes. So I think that's why I'm here anyway, for sure.
Yeah, mate, and I love that. And I think we're almost exactly 200 years ago was the 1824 Vagrancy Act, where the soldiers returning from the Napoleonic War were having public meltdowns. And because they were just so traumatized, like warfare back then was lines of men standing pointing a musket at each other. Have you ever heard the expression "put the wind up" someone? Like they've been terrified, they're really worried. They put the wind up them. It's because they believe that the cannonballs passing by the British soldiers, put the wind up them, and they'd have these like panic attacks, like in public. So no one really knew what to do about these thousands of blokes returning having these panic attacks. So they just made it illegal. You were considered a vagrant, and you would be locked up in jail like for an indefinite period of time for it. And so it just perpetuated this idea. And then there was like a thing in 1855 where one of the survivors of the Charges of the Light Brigade was treated by a doctor in, I think it was like Hemel Hempstead, in his garden. And then all these London-based doctors couldn't help this cavalry officer. And then this guy in Hemel Hempstead like treated him. And this cavalry officer returned to London like fully fit and like fully cognitive. And they said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, nothing. We just went into his garden, we did gardening, and we spoke about my experiences." And it's like, yeah, welcome to mindfulness and CBT. Like that was it. The guy just spoke to him and reframed his experiences and kept him calm by doing gardening. And so they went, so the key to mental health then is locking people in the countryside. So they made these huge asylums and sent people out.
It's the location.
Yeah. And then like World War I happened, and all of these millions of men came back absolutely traumatized and just desperately tried to stuff them away and not talk about it because we didn't understand it. Freud came out and was saying in the early 1900s that every trauma is nothing but a repressed unconscious sexual desire. So then
that man's obsessed with his mum and sex, not at the same time, but
mate, I had this discussion today. Freud is Christina Aguilera. Like the man, like she can sing, but her songs are shit. Like that is Freud. Freud is clever, but he said utter shit. Like he just made it up. Just an absolute loser and a drug addict. Like who just made stuff up. But it greatly challenged our perception of mental health after that.
I'm going to pull you back to the question. Why are you having this conversation?
Sorry, yeah, because we can change things, right? 200 years later, you've now got men. I've served in the military, and guys have come back from that, from like hideous health and understood health better, and done yourself like this amazing like discussion about how you used to feel about your body, and this 200 years ago would have got you locked up in a prison cell. Everyone, they're mad. They're mad. They're hysterical. They're mad. They're vagrants. Get them locked up. You know, and this evolution that's happened. You know, of our mental health. You talk about carrying our granddad's strife, but you know, the First World War happened, and the Second World War happened, and you consider the amount of mental health issues we've had since COVID-19. Consider the amount of mental health issues they had since the Second World War, where people just had no idea what they were doing. Like this was just not spoken about because British stiff upper lip. We didn't talk about it. And what happened was, inevitably, it was projected onto children. So our granddads, or even our fathers in some places, some granddads, and again, not spoken about, and then our parents onto us, and then here we are, and we're sitting here, we're going, and that's my
Yeah, I mean, just to echo a couple of things that you guys said, is like, obviously I think there's value and there's importance in this conversation. It's very much, for me, be the change you want to see. And I think we do much about, and to the question I asked you both about raising awareness and, let's put your money where your mouth is, I think we do have a responsibility, not that I have much reach, but I think where role modeling the behaviour you like to encourage in other people, coming forward and I guess like stereotypically maybe fitting in closer to male ideals of what people associate with being masculine, but actually having what a lot of people would class as effeminate or vulnerable conversations doesn't need to be classed as that. And actually, like, this conversation isn't gendered. This should be maybe a case of seeking out the right people, the right ears, or the right friends, but there's always an opportunity somewhere to connect with someone and have these conversations. And it's all very well saying strength in speaking, but can we actually open up the space and use our listening skills, and actually what are we going to do from that? Like I know we don't speak as regularly as perhaps I'd like, but everyone I've touched base with to take part in these has had conversations with DMs, or I know them personally, and it's I think men stepping forward and having these conversations only going to give courage to other men.
And even if it affects, like, even if this, what we've just done here, changes one person, that's a big enough change. One person at a time. I said that from the very start with my cystic fibrosis from the start. I didn't want to be the poster boy for cystic fibrosis, but I thought, if I speak out about this and it helps one person, it's worth it to me. Yeah. 100%.
I think
100%.
Always sticks in my mind, and something which I take quite seriously with coaching, is like leaders create leaders. And we don't want mini replicas. We just want people to take the concerted view of themselves, that self-exploratory journey, opening up these conversations with other people, checking in with themselves. Because I think so many people are walking around in this almost dissociative state of, what does it mean to be embodied? What are you actually experiencing? How can you pinpoint these emotions? How can you clearly articulate them to yourself, let alone other people? Have you got the ability to do that?
Yeah. This guy Grant, this guy Grant's just saying here, like, he never watches lives, and it's helped them. It's been
amazing.
So that there you go. Job done, lads.
Yeah. I can't see whether James is just in disbelief or his cameras.
Oh, have I frozen?
He's good for me. He's good for me. He's looks great.
Okay, cool.
You look absolutely engrossed at the moment. Which
no, there's as very typically me, I take all inspiration from Batman, and when Batman says save one. Just save one. This guy's like, I can't do what you do. I'm not tough like you. I'm not in a fight. I don't do that. I mainly just push people and run away. And Batman says, just save one. Yep. And he goes and he saves one, and he goes, oh, I can save more. And I always
do that.
Yeah, just save one. Just save one. That's it.
The Flash. Love that. Save.
Yeah. Perhaps on a deeper level, I guess we're all as a version of that, traumatized boys sharing their message in some shape or form. I mean, I speak for myself there, but if you're aware of like inner child work and stuff like that, I guess I'm trying to be the coach or the role model that I feel myself needed at that time. And if I have the opportunity to do that now, is be the change I want to see again, just to repeat that phrase.
Yeah, no, yeah, I love that, mate. Yeah, and people who become self-aware become what they needed in their childhood for other people.
Yeah, exactly that. I don't think there are any other questions unless I've missed them. But if you are new here, or this is like a new to you because you're connected with these guys, about me, as I'm running these, calling it Man Baggage, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. GMT, like if you're UK based, or midday on a Friday, and it's just about getting as many conversations going with as many men as possible, and just bringing some of this stuff to the forefront, open up space for these conversations. Nothing's off the table, nothing's too taboo. So if you do miss it, you can tune in another time and catch up. I'm just going down. Haven't missed anything. Gents, You are amazing. I appreciate you. Thank you for giving up your valuable, free, precious time. I'm sure lots of people took lots from this. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Nice to meet you as well.
Yeah.
Cheers, mate. See you soon.
See ya.
Cheers. Bye.